Hello, I'm Jenny Rake Morona, and I'm one of the small group of clergy who are affiliated with the Community of Faith at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. I'm glad to welcome you to this midweek meditation, a practice that we've developed during the COVID-19 quarantine as a way of nourishing ourselves during the course of each week. I'd like to begin today by reading just 2 verses from the Gospel of Matthew, a story, a parable, traditionally known as the parable of the mustard seed. Eugene Peterson, in his translation, though, has called it the parable of the pine nut. He said, Jesus told another story. God's kingdom is like a pine nut that a farmer plants. It's quite small as seeds go, but in the course of years, it grows into a huge pine tree, and eagles build their nest in it. So I'm telling you, I've chosen this story of the pine nut, the pine tree, because I wanted to talk a little bit about seeds and growing things today. And I wanted to show you this avocado tree here in the back. In back of me. This avocado tree was grown from a seed. My grandson, Jack, and I, about 4 years ago, took an avocado seed and put some toothpicks in it, settled it into a glass of water, and put it in the dark closet. You know how this is done. We waited for the roots to grow down into the water, and then we brought it out into the light and waited and watched while the stem and the leaves grew up towards the sunlight. It has gone through several pots, as you can imagine. I've never had this happen before, but it grew and grew, and we changed it into bigger and bigger pots, and now it's in a pot big enough to be on wheels, and the plant is actually tall enough that it's hit the ceiling now, and I'm going to need to take it outside to give it more room to grow. You know, everything that's alive needs plenty of room to grow. So I've told you about the seeds. I've told you I'd like to talk a little bit about seeds today, growing things today, because a nurse friend and I were talking the other day over Zoom, and she asked me what seeds I thought had been planted during this COVID-19 time. I told her about my peas and my zucchini in my backyard, but she was actually talking about a different kind of seed. She was wondering if I was noticing any new life stirring within me and around me during this time of quarantine when we've all been apart, during this very disorienting and disquieting, disarming time of staying at home, trying to keep ourselves and others safe from a virus that can be and has been so very, very deadly over these months. So I want to ask you that question too. What seeds do you sense have been planted within you and around you? And I also want you to consider what is the ground, what is the soil like that those seeds have been planted in. The day my friend and I had this conversation was just a day or two after the governor's office and the health department released a framework of requirements for spiritual and religious communities to meet as we consider whether and how to possibly gather in person again. There's a lot to carefully consider there, as Tad has told us a little bit about in this last week. It may also have been that very same day or just a day or so after George Floyd was killed on a street in Minneapolis by a police officer who had his knee on his neck for something like 8 or 9 minutes. The deadly virus at work in this death, the virus of racism, did not, of course, get planted during this quarantine time, but it has come again into full flower while we've been on lockdown. Naively, probably, I didn't think about what might be coming in the wake of that murder, but I did think about the things that we've been exploring together on our spiritual journey during this time apart, and I think that it's worth looking at those things, remembering those things. We've been talking about composting our fears. That is having fear, but not becoming fear. Instead, allowing our fears to be witnessed, to be learned from, to be prayed with and transformed into something useful or beautiful. We've been talking about paying attention to everything from our grief and the grief of our neighbors, to experiencing the beauty blooming in the world around us over the springtime. We've explored being swept clean by uninvited guests such as anger and fear, disappointment, envy, loss, all for the sake of preparing for something new. Pastor Tad's been walking us through the signs of and the call into evolving ways of being church, knowing our Creator and expressing with our lives the divine mystery that continues to create in love. Some of us have also been learning a contemplative way of connecting with that love to fuel the work of justice and compassion in the world that we know is our truest expression of worship, our clearest way of acting on our devotion to the one who loves all of creation and asks us to love our neighbors as ourselves. So I'd like you to also consider what it is that has been swept or is being swept out of you. What you yourself may have cleared out and what it may still feel like needs to be let go of for the sake of making space for this new growth. It may be that you have some new grieving to do in the wake of this killing and the racism that has come to full flower right in front of us. You may have old ideals that need to be shed, old hurts that need to be tended, that have made themselves known during this last week or so. You may have familiar fears that still cling and cause you to feel stuck or trapped. What's becoming clear to me is that all of us who are white have a lot of learning to do. I'll speak for myself. I have a lot of learning to do about the assumptions that I make, about the privileges that I enjoy, about how we still participate, how I still participate in the racism that our country was founded on, and how it still impacts our neighbors, those living very near to us and those living far from us, living in different communities, living even in different states and even perhaps different countries as well. So what is being swept away for the sake of this new thing that is growing? And now about the parable of the mustard seed or the pine tree. These big, beautiful trees all start out as tiny seeds that fall into the earth and gradually stop being seeds. And they become first a system of roots that joins up with other roots, all seeking nourishment and water from the earth. And then feeding the plants that eventually grow big enough to be homes for birds and for all manner of life. Jesus says that God's presence is like that. God's presence is like that tree that grows big enough, has roots, a root system that connects all throughout the earth, collecting water and nourishment, and grows then big enough to be home for all manner of life. Like David Wright described when he talked about Celtic spirituality last week, God's presence is the creative energy at work within, around, between, and throughout all of us and all of creation, growing, emerging, evolving, healing, transforming, outgrowing its pods again and again like my avocado tree, ready to push its way through the roof. And that's precisely where I think we're sitting right now. What we have traditionally called God's kingdom, which we can now think of as the living presence of God, or perhaps the luminous web that connects all of life, or the Christ Spirit in union with us, is very much alive. The Christ Spirit, the presence of God, the web that connects all of life is very much alive, even in this very scary, horrific, and painful time. The web, the presence of God, the Spirit of Christ, is asking us to find ways best suited to each of us to give that life form and substance in the world right now. We are being asked to grow like seeds, to change, to emerge, to create home and shelter and nourishment and safety for others. As Tad said on Sunday, we are being called to find our prophetic voices, our prophetic work, our way of being, the creative love of God right here, right now, in the world we live in, as it is. The world that is struggling and groaning, suffering, grieving, protesting, hoping, fighting, believing in something better, and working to push its way through all that would hold it back or hold it down. Because we are part of the web of divine presence, we are called to be part of that struggle for the sake of life for everyone. We are all called to be part of the work of life-giving love. So once more, the questions to ponder in the days ahead. How are you being swept clean for something new? And what seeds have been planted in you and around you? And what is the soil of that, the soil that those seeds have been planted in? We've been talking about the presence of the living presence of God, as that soil that the seed grows in. What seeds have been planted? Where is the web of God's presence at work in us, in the world? And how will we give that presence substance and form in the days ahead? I'll close with this quote by Henry David Thoreau. Though I do not believe that a plant will spring where no seed has been, I have great faith in a seed. Convince me that you have a seed there, and I am prepared to expect wonders. So may it be.